So we have been exploring the UK for the past couple of years, and one name keeps coming up.
One name comes up consistently. We would say he's almost responsible for the way the UK is today. But to be fair, we don't know that much about him. Well, we've heard the name in school and stuff like that, but just broadly. But the first time we heard it was in the Tower of London, and he was responsible for the Tower of London and being built. And then the next time, you know, we heard it multiple times throughout, but then the next time we heard, we was at
Clifford's Tower
in York. Yeah. If you've not watched our York video, right now we're in the middle of our York series. And the last video before this was us exploring Clifford's Tower, which was built by William the Conqueror. But what made this guy so powerful? And the other name for him is the Bastard King. So why is he called the Bastard King?
Yeah, what's that about?
So today we're going to find out. We are watching William the Conqueror, the Warrior King by Biographics. And he's going to teach us about the man who's pretty much responsible for the direction the UK is going today. I'm assuming. I could be completely wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me in the comments. I'm usually wrong. You guys correct me though, and that's how we get better. Iron sharpens iron. Or you guys are hitting iron against, you know, a dull rock. I don't know what to say. Let's just watch the video. These are all our Patreons. They help support our adventures just for the price of a cup of coffee. They help us out and help videos get created like this, and we love them for that. We could love you for that and put your name up here as well. So if you want to support, information is down below. Let's find out about William the Conqueror.
1066 CE. The English throne sits vacant after the king dies without an heir. Three claimants to the title quickly rise and prepare to do battle over who would wear the crown. At the end of this turbulent year, invasions would be mounted, battles would be fought, and only one man would be left standing with the pride.
I'm going to point out what I always point out. It's like no matter what you watch in British history, it's like before you can learn this, you should learn this.
Yeah,
it's
there's always something you got to know first.
Every time you learn something, you find out you need to go backwards more.
Is grasped in his bloody fist. It is a tale that reads easier as fiction than fact, and in fact, it has been the inspiration for many famous fictional dynastic struggles, including Game of Thrones. This is the story of the victor of this struggle, who conquered a kingdom and changed the fate of a country and a continent. This is the story of William the Conqueror. Our story begins around 1000 CE. Viking raiders have been terrorizing the coasts of Europe for over 200 years. They took vast tracts of land by conquest, including the north coast of France by the English Channel, which eventually became known as the Duchy of Normandy. Further advances came on the British Isles, most notably in 1013 when the King of Denmark conquered England and Danes ruled the country for 30 years before being driven out by the native Anglo-Saxons. In these early feudal times, the central government controlled by the king was weak and decentralized, the land broken up into a series of earldoms, duchies, and baronies ruled by an earl, a duke, or a baron. These provincial leaders were, in theory, vassals of the king and sworn to him by an oath of fealty, but in practice they were very much autonomous, and struggles between the king and the provinces and between the provinces themselves were common. William was born around 1028 CE, the illegitimate son of Robert I, Duke of Normandy. This led to his original nickname, usually used by his enemies, William the Bastard. His father seemed to have little interest in marrying any of his mistresses, which meant that William was considered the heir to the duchy from a very young age. In 1035, Robert embarked on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem against the advice of his advisors. He made it to the Holy City, but fell ill and died on the return journey, leaving William, at age 7, the Duke of Normandy. As was typical when a child inherited a province or kingdom, there was great instability in Normandy as the region's nobles and William's relatives fought each other for control of the region and the young duke. A series of William's guardians were killed, including one, Osborne, in the duke's bedchamber while he slept. Things came to a head in 1047 when Guy of Burgundy arose in rebellion against the ducal government supported by other nobles. They attempted to capture Duke William at Valognes, and had they succeeded, he almost certainly would have been killed. But William escaped and fled south to Paris, seeking refuge with King Henry I. William soon returned, however, at the head of an army, and together with the forces of King Henry, they defeated the rebels at the Battle of Valdoune. At age 18, Duke William was already showing himself to be a capable soldier and commander. The rebellion of 1047 was not to be the end of Normandy's internal strife. William continued to deal with rebellious nobles until 1054. At this point, alarmed by the consolidation of power under William, King Henry turned against his vassal and led an army into Normandy. But he was soundly defeated by William's forces and chased out of the duchy. He tried again in 1057 and...
So just so I'm getting this clear, once the Saxons pretty much chased out the Vikings, it was all pretty much like they still had the king, but it was still like majority just smaller groups of people, like dukes and lords and stuff, was kind of running their own thing.
That's what it seems like.
So, and duchy came up before, and I know this sounds really stupid, but the only time it came up in, what was it? King John, the Worst King, our Worst King video. I think that was the first time I ever heard of the Duchy of Normandy. And before that, I know it sounds really funny, the only time I ever heard the term duchy was from the Bob Marley song, referring to, I was referring to that. I've never heard the term duchy.
No, I haven't either.
Now, like, this is the second time hearing duchy. But you're seeing the same idea of helping, turning, because Henry I helped him at one point and then
turned on him.
And here we are. And I want to give a round of applause, but the kids are sleeping. We've managed to make our way back from King Henry VIII to Henry I. So
yay.
We've done it.
Was defeated again. This enmity continued until King Henry's death in 1060. By 1060, William had largely taken control of Normandy and put down opposition to him. With the death of King Henry, his 7-year-old son Philip was named king, but he was too young to rule. One of the regents appointed to rule the kingdom during Philip's minority was William's father-in-law, Baldwin V, Count of Flanders. So there would be no trouble from the crown for the time being. So William, therefore, turned his focus towards expansion. The Duke acquired some territory on the continent, such as the county of Maine, and fought a campaign in Brittany, but his keenest interest lay to the north, across the Channel, to England. It was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone that King Edward the Confessor would die without producing an heir to his throne, leaving a power vacuum that various factions would rush in to fill. The most logical internal candidate to succeed Edward was Harold Godwinson, the Earl of Essex. Harold was a leading member of the Godwin family, the most powerful nobles in the kingdom. He was also Edward's brother-in-law. However, Duke William also felt he had a legitimate claim to the throne.
So I have a question of these tapestry things. Is that like actual, like, during that time, is that how they was recorded in history?
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Or are these like modern, or is that like, what is he showing right there? You guys would know. What is that thing that he's showing right there? I want to know, did they sew stuff back then of important events?
Like on Brave, the tapestry.
Like on Brave?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, like on Brave. She did. We've been watching some Disney with the kids. Don't even worry about it.
At one point in 1051, the Godwins fell out of favour with King Edward and were exiled. It's believed that the king reached out to William at this point and named him his heir. Edward had lived in Normandy for 30 years after his father was deposed by the Danes, and he was protected by the Dukes of Normandy, so, well, this connection made sense. However, a year later, the Godwins returned to England and reconciled with Edward, thus leaving the question of succession extremely murky. Some historical sources sources tell us that Harold Godwinson travelled to Normandy around 1064 and met with Duke William. It's said that he swore an oath during that meeting to uphold William's claim to the throne of England. However, the only sources that document this are Norman, and there's no way to know if this actually took place or if it was just Norman propaganda. King Edward the Confessor died on January 5th, 1066. On his deathbed, he named...
So I have a question, right? So I kind of assumed that William the Conqueror was the beginning. This might sound really stupid because I know that England was based off a Roman word, but I've always and I don't know if it's just people being like I know there was Saxons there, but is this the beginning of England? Did England become England in the British blood of what we consider people who have English blood? Is this do you get what I'm saying? Is he bringing it? Because I know that England is England, but I know that Scotland has they're different.
Yeah.
Their bloodline is different. Is this what that's my question? Is this
Start
what
of the English line?
Is this the start of the actual English line that we know it of today? Is this? Maybe they'll answer that. I don't know.
Harold Godwinson as his heir. Harold acted quickly, crowning himself king the next day and quickly gaining the support of the English nobility. Across the Channel in Normandy, Duke William was furious. He knew at this point that the only way to uphold his claim to the throne would be to take it by force. He vowed to raise an army and invade England. This ambition was hardly secret, and all of Europe watched and waited throughout the spring and summer of 1066 as William prepared his invasion force. Harold, of course, heard of William's plan and raised an army of his own to counter the threat of a Norman invasion. He spent most of the summer in the south of England waiting for Duke William to make his move. However, most of Harold's force was composed of civilian militia levies that needed to return to their fields to harvest their crops, and the king was forced to dismiss a large part of his army on September the 8th. And to make matters worse, around the same time, Harold learns that another claimant to the throne had appeared. A year before the events of 1066, Harold Godwinson's brother Tostig had been stripped of his earldom of Northumbria, and
I get so overly hyped about Vikings. I get the fact that we have not done Viking history on this yet in the UK is just amazing. I get so overly hyped about Vikings and Romans. It's coming. Hit like and subscribe. It's coming. And check out our tripping through the UK videos because there's Viking stuff in there. And I also get overly hyped there, but I actually get physically overly hyped because it's there in front of me. I really freak out over Vikings. Love Vikings or the Danes because they wasn't called Vikings back then. They was called the Danes.
Mm-hmm.
And driven into exile. Infuriated by what he saw as his brother's betrayal, he went to the King of Norway, Harald Hardrada, and convinced him to make a claim for the English throne and invade from the north of the country. Harold believed that he had a legitimate claim to the throne of England because he was descended from the line of Vikings that had conquered and ruled England for 30 years before Edward the Confessor took over. Harold spent the summer of 1066 making preparations for his invasion and left Norway at the end of August with a fleet of 300 ships and an army of 15,000 men. He landed in England in early September and met up with Tostig. Together, they attacked towns and villages throughout Northumbria and defeated an English army led by local lords. This prompted the surrender of the great city of the north, York. In the south, Harold learns of the Norwegian invasion and quickly turns north with as many soldiers as he could muster. He made the 185-mile trip north in only 4 days, riding day and night. On September the 25th, 1066, the Norse army left their encampment and marched to Stamford Bridge, where they expected to meet with representatives of the city of York to receive hostages and supplies. Not expecting a fight, they left most of their heavy armor back at the camp, and imagine their surprise then when they arrived to the camp not to find townspeople, but rather the English Royal Army just waiting for them. Alarmed, Harold Hardrada and Tostig Gudwinson rode forward to meet their enemy. King Harold approached them alone. He spoke to his brother, offering him his earldom back if he turned against Hardrada and sided with him. Tostig asked what Harold would offer Hardrada for his trouble. 7 feet of English ground, for he is taller than other men, Harold replied coolly. There could be no negotiating with rival claimants to the throne of England, and Tostig refused to switch sides. The Battle of Stamford Bridge, it was on. The Norwegians began to retreat across the bridge, a stronger position waiting for them on the other side as the English attacked. Harold's army was held up on the bridge by a single Norse soldier, a berserker armed with a 2-handed great axe. He killed 40 men single-handedly before he was finally killed by an English soldier.
Whoa.
That's the stuff I'm talking about. That's it. That's like...
That's crazy.
And if you read history of the berserkers, they used to get them really freaking high and drunk. So they was feeling no pain. They just felt like they could take on the world.
Wow.
I don't know, 40 men
who floated under the bridge, and
I'm telling you, British history is just second to none. Freaking Battle of Stamford Bridge. Viking berserker takes out 46 men. Are you in? What the? It's hard just not to get hyped over this stuff.
Stabbed him from beneath. The English rushed across the bridge, meeting the shield wall of the Norse. The battle was furious. At some point, Harold Hardrada was mortally wounded by an arrow, and Tostig Gudwinson was slain on the field. The lack of heavy armor on the part of the Norse made the difference, and their army was just cut to pieces. Once the English broke through the Norse shield wall, the battle became a slaughter. By the time it was over, 10,000 were dead. Harold allowed the survivors to return to Norway peacefully. So many had died that only 25 of the original 300 ships were needed to transport them back. Never again would a Scandinavian army threaten England. The age of Vikings was over. But Harold didn't have time to celebrate his victory. Instead, he immediately turned around and marched south again because he knew Duke William was coming. Just 3 days after the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September the 28th, the Norman army landed at Penvesey Bridge on the south coast of England. Like Harold, William didn't know of the Norwegian invasion, but it worked out nicely for him because it allowed him to land unopposed. The Duke moved his forces to the nearby town of Hastings, where he built a wooden castle. There he was content to wait, close to the supply lines via the sea, for Harold would have to come to him. Harold heard of William's invasion while he was marching south, but he proceeded more slowly than he had when responding to the Norwegian invasion. His army was still recovering from the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and he had to leave a large part of it in the north. Even still, he probably moved too quickly. Had he waited a few more days, he likely would have had more men at his disposal to face the Normans. As it was, Harold's army encamped at the top of a steep slope on the night of October the 13th, a few miles north of William's fortified camp at Hastings. His efforts to surprise William failed, and the Normans knew that he was coming. The morning of October the 14th dawned unusually bright and warm for October in England. Duke William's Norman army left its camp and marched where the English were. William hoped to settle the question of who should rule England with a single decisive battle. Whoever won was clearly ordained by God to sit on the throne, is what he believed.
That is something that we will be going into more in depth in the future, because that is something that if you go through our comments, the Battle of Hastings is consistently brought up. So I would assume, given that we're watching this now, that this is a very significant battle, which,
The English army was almost entirely composed of infantry, with no cavalry and few, if any, archers. With that in mind, Harold kept his forces on top of the hill, having his front rank lock shields to an impenetrable wall that would fend off the Norman infantry and cavalry attacks and blunt the effect of the Norman archers. And that's exactly what happened during the early stages of the battle. Repeated charges by the Norman cavalry were repulsed, and the Norman infantry were unable to break through the shield wall. The French archers were hampered by the steep slope, firing either directly into the shield wall or over the heads of the English. Then, the first decisive moment of the day. The left flank of the Norman army suddenly broke and ran in a panicked flight. A rumour spread through the ranks that Duke William had been killed, and the Normans wanted no part in continuing the battle without their leader. Even though Harold ordered his army to remain on the hill, some disobeyed and chased the fleeing Normans. William, though, was not dead, and he rode through the ranks of the fleeing soldiers, removing his helmet to show. Even though Harold ordered his army to remain on the hill, some disobeyed and chased the fleeing Normans. William, though, was not dead, and he rode through the ranks of the fleeing soldiers, removing his no part in continuing the battle without their leader. Even though Harold ordered his army to remain on the hill, some disobeyed and chased the fleeing Normans. William, though, was not dead, and he rode through the ranks of the fleeing soldiers, removing his helmet to show them that he was still in the fight. He managed to turn them around and attack the pursuing English. Outside of the protection of the shield wall, the English took heavy casualties. A lull settled over the battlefield as the soldiers from both armies rested. The retreat of his left flank had given William a new idea. If he had portions of his army pretend to retreat, he could provoke the English to follow and engage them off the hill and without the shield wall. When the battle recommenced, it's believed he did this at least twice with moderate success. The English were taking casualties, but the line held. The issue was still very much in doubt as afternoon turned to evening. Soon, darkness would make further fighting difficult, if not impossible. Just as it seemed nothing would be settled that day after all, catastrophe suddenly struck the English. King Harold was hit in the eye with an arrow going into his brain. He fell from his horse, having been killed instantly. Without their king, the English army was leaderless and quickly fell apart. The Normans pursued the fleeing English for a while, but were stopped by darkness. It didn't matter, though. The Battle of Hastings was over, and there was only one claimant left to the English throne. Despite his victory and the death of Harold, the English still resisted the Norman invasion for another 2 months, forcing William to take the city of London by siege. But soon enough, it was over, and on Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned as the King of England. It took another 5 years for William to pacify his new realm, as he dealt with a series of rebellions by the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. William dealt with this by building a series of castles throughout England and giving them to his supporters in order to keep order over the land. By the time William died.
Now, was William the Conqueror by blood, was he Anglo-Saxon himself, or was he full Norman? Mm-hmm. Because like that bloodline goes back and forth, and obviously for him to be part of that duchy means it was part of the Greater England, I believe, or was he just full French blood or Norman? I guess Norman would be French because it's on the French. How does that work? Did he have Anglo-Saxon blood in him?
England was dotted with over 500 castles. The most famous fortress that William built was the White Tower in London, which eventually became the central keep of the Tower of London. One of William's key problems was his inability to be in two places at once. When he was in England, there were uprisings in Normandy, and when he was in Normandy, there were rebellions in England. William spent most of his first 10 years of his reign travelling between the two countries, dealing with rebels, while also gradually transforming English life. Over time, most of the Anglo-Saxon nobles had been replaced by Normans, and the ones who were left began to marry into Norman and other French families. Official documents were written in Latin or French instead of Old English. Two works enhance our modern understanding of this period. The first is the Bayeux Tapestry, an incredible 230-foot-long piece of embroidered cloth commissioned by William's brother Odo shortly after the Battle of Hastings. The tapestry depicts the events of 1066 from the Norman side, from King Edward's death to the victory of the Normans at the Battle of Hastings. Incredibly, this tapestry has survived intact for over 900 years and can still be seen today in a dedicated museum in Bayeux. The The second work was commissioned by King William in December 1085. He wanted a complete record of all the royal holdings in England, a record that came to be called the Domesday Book. This book documented all the lands of the English realm in great detail, including who had controlled the lands before the conquest, how much tax revenue the area produced, the number of people who lived there, even absurdly specific details such as how many chickens a particular farmer had or how much milk a dairy farm had produced in a given year. This record, preserved in the National Archives in London, offers us great insight on the disposition and administration of England during the time of the Norman Conquest. In 1087, William returned to Normandy to deal with his eldest son Robert, who was allied with the King of France in an attempt to undermine him. While engaged in this campaign, William was injured by the pommel of his saddle, and the wound grew infected. He was taken to Rouen, where his condition quickly deteriorated. William knew he needed to settle his affairs. He left Robert the Duchy of Normandy, and his second son William was given control of England. Once it became clear that the king was going to die, his advisors and courtiers all left him to settle their own affairs. As a result, William died completely alone on September the 9th, 1087, aged 59. In the immediate aftermath of the king's death, his sons Robert, William, and Henry all fought each other over control of the kingdom. Normandy itself eventually became part of the Kingdom of France, and the heritage of the Vikings was swept away. The course of English history, meanwhile, was changed significantly by the events of the Norman Conquest. Prior to the conquest, England had more closely identified culturally with Scandinavia than with continental Europe. Afterwards, England was brought closer to France, ties which bounded into the Middle Ages and caused a centuries-long rivalry between the two countries. The story of the Norman Conquest is one of the most famous in world history. It was a momentous event that shaped the course of European history for centuries to come, and it bestowed upon William I, King of England and Duke of Normandy, a new title, one that no one is likely to forget: William the Conqueror. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you're looking for something to
But I like it. I like the story. I like how, and so you visualize it in your head, right? You visualize in your head. These are so different of cultures, because like, okay, we don't get Vikings 100% right in what we visualize Vikings.
No.
But if you go to like Game of Thrones, what was it? The Dothrakis.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like Vikings, and then you visualize the French, that it was a little bit more like, what's it called? There was a little bit more like well-to-do, organized, which might be completely wrong to the history. But then you go to the Anglo-Saxons, and you see more like what we would consider the country people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you have these different ideas and mindset, and all three of them coming together. And then, you know, William the Conqueror managing. Well, he didn't have to do anything with the Vikings, but if I'm not mistaken, I don't think that I feel like they said William the Conqueror himself, like when he built Clifford's Tower, when Clifford's Tower was built, that he did have to fight off Vikings while he was there. There was like rising up of Vikings. So I don't think when he said that, I don't know if all of them went back. If I'm wrong, you guys can tell me, but I feel like that there was some aftermath once he took, that there was still Scandinavian people in that area. And to sit there and, I don't know, you got anything down there?
I think it was just really cool how he just kept conquering, and then he thought it was because whoever would win was chosen by God. And like I've seen that on a couple other things, that's what the kings, some of them, really think.
No, a lot of them believe that. They call that, well, there's a term for that. Divine right?
Divine, yeah.
Is it divine? No, divine conquest? Something like that?
I don't know. Divine birthright.
No, there's a name for it, because that's what they called America. When they came to America, they said it was something like that. I forget the name of the word. You're probably just saying it, repeat 100 times. And I'll put it down at the bottom of it. Here. It's late, but I think what's amazing about history in general is you can go anywhere. And I think a lot of people, when they go to the UK or they go to France or they go pretty much anywhere, and they're like, I see these castles are pretty, they move on. But if you just take a moment, really just say take a moment, if you take a moment, you're going to fall down that rabbit hole. And you're going to realize the stories that they see. So like watching this video right here, and for some reason, just like when he said, oh, William the Conqueror built the White Tower, I just got chills of having a flashback of me just walking through those walls. Not walking through the wall. That would give me chills too if I could do that. But walking through in those walls that he built, and the other places like Clifford's Tower and York Castle, the stories that came from that, like the two princes that disappeared, Henry VIII, and meeting Amber Lynn at the gates of what this person built.
Yeah.
It was like, it wasn't a kickoff to history, but like he said, it was a kickoff to the direction that we was going. And I think a lot of people just don't grasp the importance of when you look at these old stones and when you look at these axes and these things that people find in the ground, and just how amazing and how it all leads to us. Like even this right here, this battle right here, this man leads to why I am how I am. And that's mind-blowing, you know? And I don't know, I think that's amazing. That's why we're addicted to it. And if you're addicted to it, hit the like button, hit subscribe, because this is what we do. We like to delve into it. Do we know history? No. Especially British history. But we're learning, and maybe you know it and you want to help us, and maybe you don't know it and you want to learn with us, or you want to make fun of us. Either which way, hit the subscribe button. We'll do it together. We are not right, I would say 90% of the time.
Nope.
But we're doing our best. But with that, I am Rich.
And I'm Tiffany.
And that was William the Conqueror.